All right, ready to dive into a pivotal moment. Buckle up, because we're talking about the 2011 intervention in Libya,
Oh, yeah.
going deep with Ian Martin's All Necessary Measures.
Right into the thick of it.
This book, no punches pulled.
Straight shooter, that Ian Martin.
So for those who might not remember every detail, let's rewind.
Back in time.
Libya, February 2011. What's the situation on the ground?
Picture this. The Arab Spring, protests erupt in Libya, and Gaddafi, well,
He doesn't exactly welcome them with open arms, does he?
no, not quite. Brutal force was more his style. And the rhetoric?
Explosive, like
Oh.
off the charts intense.
You said it. This wasn't just about quieting things down. It was about making a statement. And a very harsh one at that.
I remember those news reports.
Yeah.
Gaddafi on television comparing protesters to, what was it?
Rats. He called them rats.
Rats, right? And vowing to cleanse Libya house by house.
Mm.
Chillin' stuff.
And it wasn't just talk.
No.
The International Commission of Inquiry, they released their findings. Human rights abuses. And not just a few, on a massive scale.
They pulled no punches in the report. It was a grim picture.
And the international community, they weren't just going to sit back and watch this unfold.
Definitely not. Things were escalating rapidly.
The UN Security Council hit Gaddafi with sanctions, arms embargo, travel bans, the works.
The whole shebang.
But here's where it gets really interesting. They even referred the situation to the International Criminal Court, the ICC.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
And get this, it was a unanimous decision.
Unanimous.
Yeah.
Can you believe it?
Wow, China, Russia, the US all on the same page. That's practically unheard of, right? It really is. You don't see that every day, especially not at the UN Security Council.
But even with all that pressure, all those eyes on him, Gaddafi was defiant.
Oh, absolutely. He was digging in his heels.
He actually intensified his military offensive, pushing to take back rebel-held territory. It's like he was doubling down, upping the ante.
It was a bold move, that's for sure.
And that's when the calls for a no-fly zone really started to gain traction.
Because at that point, it wasn't just about protests anymore.
Right. It's a full-blown conflict, a powder keg ready to explode.
Exactly. And that's where those differing agendas, those motivations for intervention, they become crucial to understand.
Okay, let's unpack those motivations then. You've got different players involved.
Yep.
France, the UK, the US. They all want Gaddafi out, but their reasons. Were they all on the same page there?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Were they all singing from the same hymn sheet? Well, France and the UK, they were particularly vocal, pushing hard for military action.
And their reasoning.
They cited a potential genocide, drawing parallels to Srebrenica.
That's a powerful comparison to make. We have to act now, or we'll have another Srebrenica on our hands.
Right. A moral imperative. But, and this is where it gets tricky, Martin, he really digs into this whole narrative in the book.
Oh, so he's questioning that line of thinking.
He's raising some really important points.
Yeah.
He points out that this whole threat of genocide, it was largely based on what turned out to be exaggerated reports.
So not entirely accurate.
Let's just say the situation on the ground, it didn't quite line up with all the alarm bells being sounded.
So were they knowingly inflating the threat, or were they being misled by bad intel?
That's the question, isn't it? Were they caught up in the heat of the moment? Or were there other factors at play?
Right, like what?
Well, remember, we're talking about countries with their own strategic interests in the region.
Right. It's never as simple as good guys versus bad guys.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so complicated. France, the UK, the US, they all had their own reasons for wanting Gaddafi out. It wasn't just about humanitarianism, let's put it that way.
Okay, so maybe some ulterior motives in the mix.
Martin argues that there was a real lack of understanding about Libya's complexities.
So rushing in without really knowing the lay of the land?
Precisely. A sense of, we'll figure it out as we go, which, as we know, rarely works out well. And to make matters even more complicated,
It gets worse.
the Arab League, they were all for removing Gaddafi, while the African Union, they weren't so gung-ho, to say the least.
Not exactly a united front then.
More like a fractured one. Different groups, different priorities, all vying for influence.
So you've got this pressure cooker of international pressure, a mix of humanitarian concerns and strategic interests. What could possibly go wrong? It's like they flipped to the last page without a care for the chapters in between, and things rarely turn out rosy when you do that. So, the intervention, it happens. The UN Security Council gives the green light to a no-fly zone, all to protect Libyan civilians. Sounds pretty straightforward, wouldn't you say?
Simple enough on paper, maybe. But Martin lays it out clearly, the reality. Way more complicated. Picture this. You're on a road trip, destination set. But then you hit these detours, each one leading you further astray.
And in this case, that detour, it takes us from protecting civilians to something way bigger.
Exactly. That initial focus on preventing a humanitarian crisis, it morphed. Became about something much more ambitious. Regime change.
So shifting gears from defense to offense, and
Yeah.
you mentioned officially earlier, you think there were other goals at play, ones they weren't broadcasting.
That's where Martin's book shines a light, publicly. All about humanitarian aid. But behind closed doors, Gaddafi's removal, that was the real objective.
So a whole lot of smoke and mirrors. Makes you wonder what else they weren't telling us, doesn't it?
And that lack of transparency, even more concerning when you factor in the role of special forces operating within Libya.
Hold on, we're not just talking about air power anymore.
Nope. We're talking boots on the ground, special forces from the US, the UK, France, even Qatar and the UAE, deployed to Libya, often with very little oversight, operating outside the lines of that UN mandate.
So a covert operation running parallel to an already complex intervention. Did anyone even know these guys were there?
That's the thing Martin really emphasizes. The lack of transparency surrounding these deployments, all of the secrecy, it raises serious questions about accountability, about who's calling the shots. If nobody knows what's really going on, who's answering for it?
It makes you realize how much more convoluted this all was than they let on.
Yeah.
But hold on, we've got another piece of the puzzle here. Arming the rebels, what about that?
Right, another layer to untangle. Just imagine it. Weapons flooding into a country already in turmoil. No real control over where they're going, who's getting their hands on them.
It's like giving fireworks to a bunch of kids and hoping for the best. Not exactly a recipe for stability, is it?
You got it. And that's exactly how it played out in Libya. Weapons meant for certain rebel groups, they ended up elsewhere. Sometimes in the hands of groups with entirely different goals.
Oh, so not exactly the intended recipients.
You could say that again. You had Qatar backing Islamist factions, while the UAE was supporting more secular forces, each one playing their own game, chasing their own objectives.
So no coordination, different agendas, and a mountain of weapons. What could possibly go wrong?
You're catching on. That lack of unity within the rebel movement, it fueled the instability that plagued Libya later on. By arming different groups with no real plan for the long game, they inadvertently set the stage for more conflict.
Okay, so let's recap. A shifting mission, secret deployments, weapons everywhere, and a fractured rebel movement. Where does it all lead?
Well, Tripoli falls, Gaddafi, he's captured and killed. But not before NATO airstrikes, and those special forces on the ground play a key role in the rebels' advance.
So mission accomplished. Was it a win for the intervention?
Depends on how you define winning. Gaddafi was gone, sure, but the victory, far from clean. Martin highlights that both sides, they crossed lines. Human rights violations were committed by both sides.
It's a good reminder that it's rarely black and white in these situations.
Exactly. And while there was a glimmer of hope that maybe this was a chance for a fresh start with an interim government, the reality was, well, the seeds of conflict, they'd already been sown.
So the dust settles, Gaddafi's out of the picture. You'd think that'd be the moment, right?
Right.
When Libya could finally breathe again, start rebuilding.
Yeah, you'd hope so.
But it sounds like that fresh start was a lot harder to come by than anyone expected.
That's the thing about hope. Sometimes reality has other plans.
So where do things start to unravel? What went wrong?
Well, security. Or should I say the lack of it? It became the biggest problem. Remember all those different armed groups, those factions?
Oh, yeah, we talked about them, the ones with all the weapons.
Exactly. Disarming them,
Right.
integrating them into some kind of national security force. That was a huge undertaking, and it never really happened.
You mentioned earlier the elections. How did that play into all this?
All right, so picture this. Elections are held in July 2012, just a year after the conflict.
Okay, fast turnaround.
Right. And on the surface, it seems like a good thing. A return to democracy, right?
Sure, makes sense.
And in a way, it was. Power was transferred peacefully. Elections were held.
But, sounds like there's a but coming.
But, and it's a big but, those underlying security challenges, completely unaddressed. Those militias, all those armed groups, they were now a part of the political landscape.
Oh, wow. So instead of disarming these groups, the elections kind of legitimized their power.
Pretty much. The very groups that were supposed to be brought under control were now part of the system, vying for power, competing for resources.
It's like inviting a pack of wolves into your house and expecting them to play nice because, well, because you've got house rules.
Exactly. And that's what we've seen play out in the years since. It's a real cautionary tale.
It makes you wonder, could things have been different? Could a stronger peacekeeping force, one with a clear mission, have prevented this? Or was Libya always headed down this path, intervention or not?
Those are the questions we're left grappling with, and there are no easy answers. But we have to learn from this.
To understand not just what happened, but why it happened. And I think that's what's so important about these deep dives. We're going beyond the headlines, uncovering those hidden complexities.
Absolutely. And with Libya, we see that sometimes the most important information, it isn't found in the headlines. It's in the details, in those uncomfortable truths.
And it's a story that's still unfolding. It reminds us that those big decisions, they have a ripple effect.
And for everyone listening, as you think about this, I'll leave you with this. What lessons can we learn from Libya? How can we use those lessons to prevent similar tragedies in the future? Because in the end, understanding the past is about creating a better future.
A powerful thought to end on. And for those who want to explore this further, Ian Martin's All Necessary Measures is a must-read.
Until next time, keep asking those tough questions.
And keep diving deep.
At the end of this podcast, please share your thoughts on the book, and if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.